Welcome back onto Chapter 9, Section 2. The New Deal, the Fair Deal, and the New Frontier all lead to President Johnson's Great Society. So we're going to kind of jump right into President Johnson's legislative successes. He was a lot of things, but he was a very effective legislative president. He was able to pass a lot of laws. He had a lot of relationships in Congress from his years in Congress, and he was a master at sort of leveraging those relationships, sometimes physically, like getting up right in front of somebody. He's a tall guy, big guy, and he'd get right up in front of someone, basically back them against a wall and like really drive home how much he needed their vote. Little physical intimidation to go along with the rest of what he was trying to get done. So we're going to talk about a lot of the laws that get passed. 1964, 1965 are some incredibly important years for getting things done in the Johnson presidency. And a lot of these laws either affect you today, right now, or they will affect you going forward. There's a few that might not end up affecting you directly, but they're still affecting you indirectly. So we're going to start with two of the big ones. Medicare is the first. This was signed into law in 1965. The whole point of it was to cover health care for older Americans, because a lot of them didn't have a bunch of extra money to pay for very expensive health care. Got a graph over there of how many people we have on Medicare each year, starting in about 1970 and accurately getting to about 2010. And then this is an old graph, so they were like guessing what 2010, 2020, 2030, 2040, and 2050 would look like. I think we're moving faster than those predictions, though. 1972, they amended to add some groups. Any American with a disability could potentially qualify for help under Medicare, and very specifically, people with a liver or kidney failure were added to the list because those are very, very, very expensive treatments to get those things handled. 2003, we get Medicare Part D. There's been other, improvements and amendments and changes to it over the years since then. But Medicare Part D is one of the more recent kind of big additions, and that added certain prescription drugs and coverage for those. And Medicare was controversial then, and it's controversial now. And the reason it's controversial is money. Medicare is expensive. We spend a lot of money on Medicare. Now, you might argue that we should spend a lot of money on Medicare because that's how we, keep our elderly, family members alive and not completely broke because of the high cost of medical care, especially among elderly folks. And some people might say, well, they didn't save up for it, Should government provide health care? If you're familiar with some of the healthcare arguments from the last few years, who should be in Medicare? Should we allow more people in? Should we cut some people out? Should we have Medicare for all? Should we definitely not do that, right? Like there's a lot of arguments about Medicare, all the way back in 1965, all the way up to today. Fun fact, former President Truman got the very first Medicare card because he had tried, remember, back in his presidency, to pass something kind of like Medicare, and he was not able to get that passed. Next up is Medicaid. These are two different laws, two different medical care laws. Medicare is about the elderly, and it's run by the federal government. Medicaid was about folks with from low-income families, and this is a state-based program. So this was also signed into law the very same day as Medicare. Also has been amended over the years. Now, and this happened all over the course of years and years and years, but it covers pregnant people, children under 19, people over 65, people with disabilities, and anyone that needs some kind of home care nurse. Also controversial then and controversial now. 1970, Texas spent less than $1 billion on Medicaid. In 2016, one of the more recent years we have like complete data for, Texas spent over $17 billion on Medicaid. And I know at the top it says like, oh, federal money is provided to manage for it. $17 billion is what Texas spent on it. The federal government spent another $17-18 billion to get our total of like $35-36 billion that we spent on Medicaid in 2016. And the rules are different in each state. Every single state has different rules on how they run Medicaid. So if you're in one state and you're on Medicaid and you move to another state, you might not be on Medicaid in that state. So it's complicated, very complicated. But it is, it does provide a lot of useful services for folks. Head Start is another big one from Johnson's Great Society, also announced in 1965. And the whole point of this is to provide education for children, children that have poor health, children from lower income families. And it started as an 8-week summer program. In 1998, it became a whole year-long program. Some of you may actually be in Head Start. Covers pre-K classes, medical care, dental care, mental health care, bilingual, bicultural education, and just any kind of stuff in between that and getting people ready for college. It is and you can see for the past, roughly 15, 16 years, the cost of it has been going up and up and up. Another important one that some of you may have benefited from directly, indirectly, you've probably benefited from these by having more grocery stores open in your area than there would have been if SNAP had not been a thing. This was originally passed in 1964, the Food Stamp Act. There have been trial runs in previous years in small locations, but as far as a nationwide rollout of the program, that was 1964. This is also a state-run program. One thing that Johnson was able to get in at the beginning is that it is non-discriminatory. You cannot say no black people are allowed to have food stamps. No women are allowed to have food stamps. Only this age can have food stamps. Religion can't have food stamps. So getting that through in 1964, not an easy thing to do. Good job, President Johnson. Like I said, legislatively successful president. He knew how to work Congress. Now, if you like the things he did, that's probably a plus. If you don't like the things he did, that's a negative. But you can't deny the effectiveness of President Johnson in passing laws, whether you support those laws or agree with those laws or not. 1988, from 1988 to 2004 is a pretty long changeover, but eventually we change over to an electronic form of the food stamps, EBT cards. And they allow quick direct payments to recipients. It reduces the costs of the program because we don't have to mail out stamps and print out stamps and do all these things. We can just do like direct deposit style cards. And in 2017, the program helped over 42 million people not go hungry and potentially starve to death. So good job doing that, helping people out. Next up is President Johnson's new cabinet position that he adds to the cabinet to go along with the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of State, is the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Signed into law in 1965, provided funds for low-income housing, subsidized rent for the elderly and people with disabilities. And here's this fancy political cartoon from the LBJ Presidential Library. Having him show off the HUD bill to FDR, and FDR looking on approvingly with his trademark long cigar and a cigarette holder. Sorry, that's a cigarette, not a cigar. Don't smoke. Either one's very bad for you. So this adds a secretary position, and the very first secretary of HUD, Housing and Urban Development, was the very first African-American cabinet member in the presidency. Robert C. Weaver was his name. And HUD today has a budget of about $50 billion, which is a lot of money. And it helps people buy houses. It helps provide homeless programs for various cities. It's helped to provide a lot of assistance for the COVID crisis, rental assistance, stuff like that. So another legislative success for Lyndon B. Johnson. A Texan, by the way, forgot to mention that. LBJ is one of our Texas presidents. In a lot of political cartoons, you'll see him in cowboy hats because, Texas. He's also able to get the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed. This is something President Kennedy had been working on since the death of a lot of civil rights activists, including Medgar Evers. He was trying to get schools to desegregate, was his big thing he was working on, and he was murdered for it, like many civil rights activists were in the 1960s. So John F. Kennedy was working on a civil rights bill, wasn't able to finish it before he was assassinated, and LBJ was able to sort of take it, build on it, use his sort of legislative access and legislative relationships with Congress, and also sort of the momentum of we need to do this for John, right? We need to do this for Jack, John F. Kennedy. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is about employment, mostly. It's got a lot of stuff in it, but for the most part, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is about non-discrimination in employment. You cannot be hired. You can't discriminate when you're hiring. You can't discriminate when you're promoting, and you can't discriminate when you're firing people, whether we're talking about government jobs or private jobs. Like if you work at a warehouse, they can't fire you or not hire you or not promote you or whatever based on your race. If you're working at a movie theater, if you're working at a high school, if you're working at any number of things, they can't, you can't be hired, you can't be discriminated against in hiring, promotions, or firing in that job based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It also prevents discrimination in any federally funded programs, in voting, and in school attendance, like desegregating schools. So that's mostly what that one does. And very directly, it creates the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. This is one of the things the Civil Rights Act of 1964 does, is it establishes this commission. It starts it. And these days, and it did all those things, right? Like, you can't discriminate based on those things. And now, if you kind of fast forward to today, they've added some what they call protected classes, things that you can't be discriminated against because of. And we have a lot of the older ones: race, color, national origin, religion, disability, that one's new, genetic information, that one's new. Sex, that was there. Age is new. Sexual orientation and gender identity are all new on that list. Now, for the most part, you can't get arrested. So if you can prove that your boss fired you because you fall into one of those protected categories, if they fire you because of your race, for instance, and you put together a complaint to the Equal Opportunity Commission and they investigate and they find out, yes, they definitely fired you because of your skin color, they're not going to throw your boss in jail. But they are going to fine the business a lot of money. So usually they hit businesses in the pocketbook. I don't think I've heard of them ever throwing anyone in jail. But that's not really what they're for, right? It's about civil penalties and fines, paying a lot of money. Civil Rights Act of 1965. President Johnson sort of brings us in the next year because Civil Rights Act of 1964, very good, did a lot of things, but it didn't really help out with voting the way that Johnson was hoping it would. So he's not the only guy that does this, but he helps, Congress put together the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which very specifically targets methods that a lot of states were using to keep black people from voting. So no more literacy tests, and we'll take a look at a couple of these literacy tests in class. They were literally impossible. And I'm not talking about they were so hard. Literally impossible. Based on whoever was grading it. And so if you were white, they would just pass you because, they wanted you to vote. And if you were black, then, whoops, you failed, because literally it was impossible to do correctly. Federal election examiners also are put together to investigate people breaking election law, to help register people that want to get registered to vote, and help sort of run things on election day. Now, there are a bunch of Supreme Court challenges to the Voting Rights Act of 1965 because the Constitution generally says it's up to the states to figure out how they run their own elections. And here's the federal government coming in and saying, no, we're going to tell you how to run your elections, even though the Constitution says you're supposed to do it. And the Supreme Court pretty much upholds the law. and says, look, the federal government, yeah, they can't actually step in and tell you how to run the election, but you guys are violating the, Civil War amendments, 13th, 14th, 15th amendments, mostly the 14th Amendment, of the Constitution. So since you're violating the Constitution, the federal government can come in and make sure you're not violating the Constitution. Other than that, you can kind of do what you need to do, but you can't violate the Constitution. So unsurprisingly, as soon as we put this in place, minority voting rates go way up. Way more black voters start coming in and voting. Way more, Hispanic and Asian and other minority voters start coming in as well. Mostly black voters, because those were mostly the ones that have been stopped from voting with a lot of these Jim Crow laws. And this does happen nationwide, by the way. We've talked in class before about how, the North has had problems and still has problems with racism. It's not just a South thing. This happens nationwide. Now, in 2013, a few years ago, we were all alive for this part, there was a Supreme Court case, Shelby County versus Holder, in 2013, and the Supreme Court struck down a chunk of this Voting Rights Act bill, the pre-clearance specifically. So we'll see what effect that has sort of going forward. It's almost been a decade, so probably get some data in the near future about what kind of effect the Supreme Court striking down chunks of the Voting Rights Act have had or have not had. We'll see. Now we're going to end with, we're spending a lot of money on NASA, you guys. We're spending a lot of money on NASA in the 60s. We got to get to the moon. So what are we getting? We're going to get to the moon and we're going to beat the Soviets to it. And we're going to get this awesome, great and wonderful, I don't know, we don't get an award for it or anything, but we got to the moon, hooray. So what does that mean? Well, we get to the moon, that's cool. We beat the Soviets to it, that's cooler. But we do get stuff from our investments, right? LASIK eye surgery comes from technology used to make sure astronauts' eyes still worked properly when out in space for long enough. Water filtration systems are necessary when you have a closed water system on, a spaceship or a space station. So sort of the advanced water filtration stuff we have, that's from there. Insulin pumps. If you or someone you know has issues with diabetes and needs an insulin pump, that was invented, to solve problems with space travel, and NASA was able to give that to the general public. Now, you might see that bulletproof vest and go, why would NASA need to invent bulletproof vests? Who were they worried was going to shoot at them? And you don't have the clearance level for that information, but I will tell you, kidding. They didn't mean to make a bulletproof vest, but they did need material that could work as a re-entry parachute, right? So when these capsules come flying back through the atmosphere, they need a parachute that can survive re-entry into the atmosphere and then deploy and hold on to something as heavy as one of those big lunar modules. And that material turns out to be really good at stopping bullets. So we get bulletproof vests. So NASA does a lot of cool technology stuff during this time period. We learn a whole lot about space flight and about basic technology that we can use and have benefits from for the rest of our lives. So, way to go, NASA. I should just end on that freeze frame. Just hold it for a while. The end.